Welcome to Ceasefire, where we seek to bridge the divide in American politics. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico White House Bureau Chief, and joining me now, two guests who have agreed to keep the conversation civil even when they disagree. They're both very good at this. Former independent presidential candidate Cornel West and conservative legal scholar Robert George. They are co-authors of Truth Matters, a dialogue on fruitful disagreement in an age of division. What could be more perfect for Ceasefire than that? Thank you both, gentlemen, so much for joining me. Two big brains, two scholars, two professors who are agreeable disagreeers, I would say. Thank you both for being here.
It's a pleasure to be on with you,
Thank
and what
you.
a blessing to be back with my dear brother Cornel.
I love this combination. Listen, you two are the perfect guests for this holiday season because we're just coming off of Thanksgiving. I'm sure a lot of turkey consumed. I'm sure also a good deal of awkward conversations, some maybe debates, some productive, some maybe not productive around those family tables. What is your advice in this holiday season as we are living in this polarized time? Two people coming together and trying to find a path forward. Cornel, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, one, we ought to just commit ourselves to love and justice, not hatred and revenge. One of the wonderful things that I've been able to experience with my very dear brother Robert George is that I love the brother when he's right, I love him when he's wrong, I love him when he's wrestling in his quest for truth, and it comes the other way because love cuts much deeper than just finite opinions or political analysis. We revel in each other's humanity, and we had to begin with that deeper moral and spiritual starting point before we even get into all of the contentiousness of politics. And that takes a lot of courage, and I mean, as a Christian, it means I can't do it by myself. I need some help. I need some grace as well.
Robert?
So true. Everything that Brother Cornel said is absolutely true. Let me remind our viewers that not everything has to be about politics. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to shy away from political discussions. The Greeks the ancient Greeks had a concept that Cornel's fond of invoking, and I am too, called parrhesia. That's translated as frank speech or plain speech. We need to be able to talk plainly with each other, including about points of politics or ethics or culture on which we disagree. But not everything has to be about politics. And we don't assess and judge each other exclusively on the basis of politics. So when we're sitting around the Thanksgiving table or Christmas or Hanukkah, whenever we've got the family together, we don't have to lead with politics and with our differences of opinion and our debates about political issues. There are lots of other things in our lives that we can talk about, we can share points on which we agree or have shared commitments or shared relationships and devotions, our children and our grandchildren and so forth, our parents. So let's begin by talking about those sorts of things. Now, it doesn't mean we can't get to politics. Eventually, we should be willing to get to points on which we disagree, including political points on which we disagree. But let's remember we human beings are complex critters. Politics is part of our lives. It's not the whole of our lives.
Well, I do notice that both of you happen to conveniently be able to avoid actually coming to Washington to sit at this table with me. I'll give you the holiday as the excuse. But when you look at Washington, whether it's the White House or Congress or even the judicial branch, what is your advice for the people that are in politics, our leaders in politics here in Washington? Is there something when they go back to those family tables for the holidays that they can bring back to D.C. to try to foster a less divisive environment?
Well, I think, one, we just have to recommit ourselves in a serious way to integrity. One of the things I love about Brother Robbie is he says what he means what he says. He doesn't pose, he doesn't posture, he's not fake, he's not phony. There's nothing fraudulent about it. When he says something, he means it. Whereas, of course, most politicians these days, they got to check and see what the polls say before they give us a sense of what their opinions are. You can't trust them. They don't have integrity. They're tied to money. They're tied to their next election. And so you end up with a lack of character. Herodotus and Ralph Waldo Emerson said character is destiny. What they meant was character is that which endures, the constancy that the great Jane Austen talks about in her novels. How do you hold on to who you are as you grow, as you develop? And it's hard to find politicians like that in both parties. and not just both, but parties across the board. We got more than two in the country. We got to keep that in mind.
Robert, your advice for your friends here in D.C.?
Well, again, I have to say amen to what Brother Cornel just said. At the end of the day, it's a matter of character. It's a matter of integrity. It's a matter of doing to the best of your lights, and we're all fallible. We all get some things wrong, doing what's right. And one thing that is right is treating other people with dignity and respect, even if we disagree with them. Even if we disagree with them on the points that matter most to us, on our most cherished beliefs, our identity-forming beliefs, even if we disagree with the way they lead their lives or the political party they belong to or the ideology they embrace, we have to treat them with dignity and respect and recognize they are fellow human beings, made in the image and likeness of God, bearers of profound, inherent, and equal dignity. When we forget that, we can quickly demonize each other, and there's so much of that going on in our politics today. The other thing I would say is that people need role models. Human beings do. This is not unique to the United States of America in 2025. For all of human history and all cultures, for anything decent to happen, people need role models. They need to see people doing it. We need more people like, for example, two former late, alas no longer with us, Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia. Now, both of these justices were people of profound conviction. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had views. Antonin Scalia had views. They weren't shy about saying what those views were. They were willing to stand up and speak out and fight for what they believed in. And so often what they believed in put them at odds with each other politically and constitutionally and legally. And yet they could be dear, beloved friends, treating each other with respect, learning from each other, engaging each other in productive ways when they disagreed. We need more of that. I can think of other examples. You can think of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Here were a couple of guys who were on opposite sides of the political fence. Reagan is president, O'Neill is Speaker of the House, two of the most powerful people in the world, not only in the nation, in the world. But despite their differences, which they could fight over very aggressively, they respected each other, they honored each other, they befriended each other, they were good friends. There's no reason, even across the lines of ideological division, that people cannot respect and even love each other. And that's so important in families where there are disagreements. To love each other, respect each other, honor each other as bearers of inherent and equal dignity.
One of the darker narratives that has become part of our national conversation, especially over the last year, is that of political violence. It's been about 3 months since the murder of Charlie Kirk, but incidents of political violence have occurred on both sides of the aisle. At the risk of this question sort of taking over our whole show, I would love to hear from both of you as people that have witnessed a lot in our politics personally and that have studied the politics of human history way back to ancient times. What do you make of this cultural and political moment, of the division, of the extremism that has now brought political violence into the fold in such a big way? Brother Cornel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, though, because Brother Robbie's point about people coming together, the William Buckleys with the John Kenneth Galbraiths or the William Styrens with the James Baldwins of the past, mean that respect sits at the center. And when you respect people, you're less likely to either rationalize, let alone engage in any kind of political violence. And a lot of times it's linguistic violence, it's psychic violence, as well as actual physical violence. And I think we all have to try to be consistent in our rejection of all forms of violence. And see, I say this as somebody who comes out of the great tradition of black struggle for black freedom. Most of the black freedom leaders were assassinated. Most of them were killed. Why? Because the white supremacy was so vicious, it cut so deep that their love for black people was translated as a hatred for whites, and therefore they ended up getting shot. And so I speak not just based on a moral and spiritual grounds, which are very important for me, but also on actual historical grounds. And we know that no democracy can survive, let alone no decent society, community can survive, as violence is the primary means by which we motivate conflict.
Yes, indeed. It's a horrible thing. It is toxic to Republican government, to the maintenance of our democratic institutions. Cornel has plenty of experience with death threats. I myself do as well. Someone went to jail for 3.5 years for threatening to kill me, federal prison. We know what it's like to speak out, and as a result of speaking out, to draw the ire of people who are not satisfied simply to answer words with words, but who are prepared to resort to violence. But we have to make clear that it is unacceptable. All Americans have to make clear. America's political leaders have to make clear. America's religious leaders have to make clear. Anybody who's got cultural influence has to make clear that political violence is simply unacceptable. As it happens, Cornel and I were guests on Charlie Kirk's show just a few months before the horrible assassination of that young man, a husband, father of two. We had a wonderful conversation with him. Neither Cornel and I nor I completely agreed with him. He didn't completely agree with either of us, but we had a very fruitful dialogue. And of course, he was a bit further from Cornel than he was from me politically, but he treated Cornel with great respect and dignity, and in fact invited him back onto the show to have a one-on-one so that they could further explore the points on which they disagreed and perhaps some points on which they converged. So it was especially hard, we were both especially hard hit, having had that experience with Charlie when the dreadful news came of his assassination. My worry is in the wake of political violence, like a violent act like that. We had the same worry back in 1968 when Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated after the assassination of Martin Luther King. We were worried then, we're worried now, will this trigger a cycle of violence? Will some people say, all right, this shows us that answering words with words, working in the political sphere is fruitless, it's futile, it can't ultimately work. The only way we can advance our cause is to resort to means other than words, other than politics. In other words, to resort to violence. And once that starts, it is hard to stop it.
Yeah, Cornel,
and that's how you get situations
Absolutely.
like the ones we all know about in history, whether it's in Northern Ireland or in many other places where once the feuding starts, once the violence starts, it's hard to put an end to it.
Yeah, Cornel, to Robert's point, how does the assassination of Charlie Kirk compare to some of the history that you both have been talking about, and what concerns you about what that moment and its aftermath, its response, is going to lead to?
Well, I just think of the courageous responses to assassinations. I think of Emmett Till's mother when she said, I don't have a moment to hate, I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. I think of Martin King's eulogy for the 4 precious girls in Birmingham, where he talked about the love that we have to hold on to and the justice we have to promote. Sister Erica Kirk, I salute her because her courageous call for forgiveness. And what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is the abandonment of revenge. Forgiveness is the attempt to push revenge back and talk about justice and love. She did it as a Christian. She was unbelievably courageous in terms of doing that at the very moment that her precious husband had been murdered. Those responses make a difference. That's where courage comes in. And part of the problem of our political class and much of our ruling elites, let alone fellow citizens, not enough moral courage, not enough civic courage, not enough fortitude, courage and magnanimity. Courage and strength of character lead to fortitude. That's what's missing. That's part of the spiritual crisis, the moral crisis of our day.
There are a lot of different conversations.
You know, Brother Cornel is
Go on.
echoing here. He's echoing the great Soviet dissident, the great writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who came to this country in 1978, spoke at the Harvard commencement. It was actually Brother Cornel's commencement. He was there within the walls. I was there as a graduate student, but it wasn't my graduation year, so I was listening from outside the walls there at Harvard. But we both heard Solzhenitsyn's speech where he said that the fundamental problem in our country is that we have lost our courage. We have lost our civic courage, and we have not fully regained that courage yet. So we need to be working on that. We need to be working for it. We need a restoration of courage. That's related to the call for integrity, because to have integrity these days takes courage.
Well, I think there's a conversation about courage going on right now among both parties, and everyone's sort of searching for what that looks like. Some are searching earnestly, some are searching more politically. I think we saw that play out with this government shutdown, the longest in history. There's talk about a potential resurgence of that happening again in January. There's a story in Reuters where they write that the deep political divisions that led to the 43-day shutdown in the first place remain unresolved. What is your advice to lawmakers in this moment? Is there too much emphasis on winning? Do they have something right? For Democrats, one of the reasons that they really pushed for this shutdown for so long was to show some semblance, in their words, of political courage, of fight that they believe voters were asking for. But it also did cause a lot of pain. Like, how do you navigate and think about courage as a politician in this moment when winning does matter so much to so many people, Robert?
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the shutdown was ridiculous. It hurt a lot of people entirely unnecessarily. I'd hate to see this happen again. As I say, it's completely unnecessary. It's game playing. That's not courage. Come on. Courage means standing up for what is right, especially when it's hard to stand up for what is right, when you pay a price for standing up for what is right. And in the Democratic Party, that will sometimes mean, it will require, standing up to the more extreme elements of the party, and same on the Republican side. Sometimes that will mean standing up against the more extreme elements of the party on the Republican side. That's not to say that the truth is always in the center. The truth isn't always in the center. But you've got extremist groups on both ideological wings and in both political parties that are intimidating other people into acquiescence, at least silence, and sometimes even acquiescence and cooperation. And we need the courage for people to refuse to do that. Just, we're not going to do that. We're not going to let you bully us, and we're not going to let you push us around. We're actually going to do what is for the common good. And sometimes that's going to require actually negotiating, actually compromising, actually trying to put the interests of the country, the interests of the people of the United States, especially the poorest and most vulnerable, at the forefront. Let's prioritize that for once.
Well, Cornel, I'm curious, do you think Democrats were displaying courage during that shutdown fight, or was it something else?
No, I don't think Democrats or Republicans were, because courage requires that you acknowledge that truth and justice is something bigger than your party. If you have a team mentality and think that your team can do no wrong and the other team can do no right, then you have not only polarization, but you have a level of juvenile conformity. Courage shatters conformity. It recognizes that there's something at stake that's bigger than just the team winning. And right now you've got this team mentality that is generating a slippery slide to chaos, let alone the increasing hatred and contempt of one another. Where's Lincoln? Where's Barbara Jordan? Where's Harold Washington? Where are the politicians who historically were willing to be critical of not just both parties, but critical of anybody, of churches, of mosques, of synagogues, of universities, in the name of something bigger than all of them? And what's bigger? Truth and justice. And as a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, I tell you, I am, and Brother Robbie is too, an extremist of love, an extremist for justice, which means what? We're willing to be marginalized in the name of something that we know is bigger than us.
Robert, you recently left, talk about courage, you recently left the board of a think tank. This is what Politico, my home here, wrote about it. Another member of the Conservative Heritage Foundation has resigned following a video posted by the organization's president defending Tucker Carlson's interview with Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes. Robert George said he can no longer remain part of the foundation without a full retraction. Can you speak a little bit about that decision?
Well, sometimes one finds oneself in a situation where it's impossible to go along with something that one's friends and colleagues and comrades are proposing or promoting or going along with. And I found myself in that position recently. I had the honor of serving on the Heritage Foundation board. I've been on the board since 2019. I think you're well aware of the circumstances that created a controversy surrounding the Heritage Foundation. Of course, as a member of the board, it was my responsibility to work with my board colleagues toward rectifying a mistake, a bad mistake that had been made at the leadership level at the foundation by a good man, but nevertheless
remind
a
viewers
bad
briefly who might not be as familiar who Nick Fuentes is and why this was so problematic in your view?
Nick Fuentes is a white supremacist who is a sympathizer with figures like Hitler and Stalin. I probably needn't say any more. Your viewers, if they're not familiar with this person, will know on the basis of that description what they're dealing with here. Apparently he has a very large following, especially among disaffected young men, and that's very worrying that a person with sympathies for figures like Stalin and Hitler would have a big following, and especially among disaffected young men. We've seen in history what that leads to sometimes. And another public commentator did a public interview, a rather softball, puffball interview with Mr. Fuentes. The leader of the Heritage Foundation defended the interview and made some allegations against the critics of the interview. I thought that was a terrible mistake. It was, from my point of view, it was necessary to repudiate the statement. When the statement was not repudiated, I felt that I had no choice. I, with the greatest regret and sadness, had to resign from the board of foundation, the foundation's board. Now, you know, sometimes you find yourself in that situation, and when you find yourself in that situation, you have to do what your conscience requires. Now, some of my colleagues on the board, their consciences took them to a different place, and I respect that. I'm not holding them up to criticism, much less ridicule. Everybody was in a tough situation. Everybody had to decide for himself or herself what the right thing to do was, and those good people took a different path than the one I took. But I had to follow I can't follow somebody else's conscience. I have to follow my conscience.
What's the response been to your decision?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it has been mixed. Certainly people who are sympathetic to Mr. Fuentes, and many of them are online on X, formerly Twitter, or on other social media accounts, have been extremely and aggressively hostile toward me. They called me some names that I had to look up. I wasn't even familiar with those names. On the other hand, you know, many good people, and again, across the ideological spectrum, people like myself on the more conservative side, people on the more liberal side have reached out to me to thank me or congratulate me for my courage. I was very gratified and grateful to William Galston, the great political theorist at Brookings Institution, former Clinton administration official, you know, certainly on the more liberal side than I am, who did a piece praising me in the Wall Street Journal. Of course, I've had the absolutely unwavering support of Brother Cornel, but also lots of people on the conservative side who abominate figures like Fuentes, who agree with me that there is absolutely no place in the conservative movement for white supremacists, anti-Semites, eugenicists, or bigots of any kind. That's my position. And a lot of people on the conservative side share that perspective, and I've been very grateful for their encouragement and their support.
Cornel, what do you think of how your friend handled this?
No, I think he's been courageous. I think he's been magnificent. But I want to make it clear that I would have a love for Brother Robbie if he stayed on the board. It's just not a question of one action or particular actions, but you're talking about a larger sense of who he is as a person of integrity and character. So that, again, I could have a variety of disagreements, staying on the board, off the board. We struggle over issues of markets and what have you. But there's a love that cuts deeper than that, and Robbie knows that, and I'm unashamed of that. And that's true not just for him, but that's true for people across the board as well. And so I'm just, you know, glad to be the brother's brother. You know what I mean?
Well, Cornel, I do want to ask before I let you go, you know, you ran for president. You know what that's like, throwing your hat in the ring, and we are coming up on midterms, and of course people are already thinking about 2028. For those considering making the move and declaring a run, what is your advice about how to do that in this moment?
Well, I mean, I ran because I want to keep alive the legacy of Martin King. I want the elimination of poverty. I want to make sure that there's democratic accountability for all the monopolies in our economy. I want to make sure we don't have 70% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. I want to make sure that the dignity and sanctity given to each person being made in the image of an almighty and loving God can be affirmed in a political way, in an economic way, as well as a moral way and a spiritual way. And people say, Brother West, that has a chance of a snowball in hell. I said, maybe so, but I'm going down swinging and fighting for it.
Robert, what about you? What do you want to see out of candidates, whether it's in the midterms or in the presidential, on the Republican side?
I want to see integrity. I want to see integrity. I want to see people standing up against this effort by extremist figures, by like anti-Semites and white supremacists and other bigots. I want to see politicians standing up to them and saying, no, you have no place here. And then I want the focus really to be on the common good of the country. And the best way to serve the common good of the country is to just ask with respect to any question, begin the conversation, begin the deliberation by asking what is and what isn't consistent with our fundamental principles, the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration next year. Let's actually take the Declaration seriously. Let's begin any deliberation on a question with, is it consistent with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, you can't answer every question simply by adverting to that statement from the Declaration, that principle from the Declaration. And we're going to have reasonable disagreements about what the implications of that principle are on many, many issues. But it's the place to begin, and we'll have a much more productive engagement of our differences on how to interpret it if we agree that we're going to begin from that principle.
We are all out of time. I could do this with you all day. What a privilege it has been to have you both on the program. I hope you have a beautiful holiday season with all those you love and who love you. Thank you so much.
Same to you.
Thank you, my dear sister. Thank you. Have a good one.
Let's turn now to this week's C-SPAN Flashback, where we dig deep into the video archives to show you a moment in political history that reminds us of today. Let's take you back to November 2012. Then Vice President Joe Biden visited a brand new Costco in Washington, D.C. to knock out some holiday shopping and push for middle-class tax cuts. Take a listen.
All the people you meet in here today, and you see, these are hardworking folks who don't need to see their taxes go up. The ability of consumers to actually have money in their pocket to be able to go out and support their families in terms of the Christmas gifts they want to buy. The middle class tax cut should be made permanent. It's already passed the Senate. It takes a single vote. We are fully prepared to work with our Republican colleagues to make sure we deal with, quote, the rest of the fiscal cliff. But that would take $900 billion off the cliff right now. So, folks, you just look around here. People are, consumer confidence is growing, and the last thing we need to do is dash that now by being unable to extend the middle-class tax cut. Thanks for shopping with me, and I know you won't tell anybody what I bought for Christmas gifts.
Flash forward to today, and affordability is a hot topic on both sides of the aisle as Americans hit the stores and online shopping this weekend. And we've got two political pros from both sides of the aisle to talk holiday shopping, the current economy, and other big topics facing the country. Republican strategist John Feehery and Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Happy holidays to the both of you. Thank you so much for being here. Look, the economy is front and center for so many Americans right in this very moment. An Ipsos poll said that it is the most important problem facing America. Look at this. Economy, unemployment, and jobs as the most important at 24%. I mean, far outpacing all of those other issues. Which party's strategy is working best right now? We'll start with you.
Well, I think, people talk about affordability, but I think what a lot of people are feeling out there is anxiety. And they feel anxiety about their job. They feel anxiety about what's going on with AI, for example. They feel anxiety about the fact that there's these tariffs that are coming out. They're not quite sure what the tariffs would mean for them. And they see all what's going on in Washington with the government shutdown. And trying to ease people of that anxiety should be the number one thing that this White House should be focused on.
How are they doing?
And I think they're a little bit messed up a little bit. I mean, I think that They're offering like $2,000 payments. I don't think that's going to do it. What I think that the president needs to do is he needs to get these tariffs behind him. He needs to start focusing on his agenda for next year, which he hasn't really focused on. I mean, I believe a great agenda item for him was make America build again. Try to get, what are you going to do next year to make people feel good about this economy? And putting people back to work through a building program would be a good idea. They have a highway bill that's coming down the pike. There's a lot of things that you have to do. The president's spending a lot of time on the international front trying to cut peace deals. That's all well and good, but as you point out, the number one thing, it's usually the number one thing, is the economy, and people are worried more about their pocketbooks than they're worried about what's going on overseas.
Joel, how are Democrats doing on this?
I think Democrats are finding their pitch. It's a moving target. Democrats have certainly not landed that yet. I actually, and just thinking a little bit about what John said too, as I think about where Republicans are in their life cycle and talking about the economy, Donald Trump's issue right now is that all of the things that are natural to him that he wants to do are things that are not going to be helpful to the American people. Pushing this tariff regime the way he's doing it, creating uncertainty for the economy, that's not going to help him. I think what Democrats have shown themselves to be pretty good at is kind of counterpunching in this moment. I think they still have some work to do to figure out what is the effective positive message to put forward. And a broader point too, on the economy, but just writ large, the American people are pretty good at telling you what they don't like right now. I don't know if the American people know what they do want, both with the economy, but also writ large from their politics, but they're pretty good at telling you what they don't like right now.
To that point, Joel, the same poll took a look at the president's approval rating and found that just 38% of Americans approve of how Donald Trump is handling his job as president. John, how concerned should the White House be about this, and what should they do to change these numbers?
They don't have to just look at the polls. They just could look at the election from earlier this month where they got kind of wiped out. It was in blue states, but they'd lost well beyond the margin of error. They lost the point spread. And I think that for them, they've got to recalibrate. I think the president's been always, as presidents always do, they feel good when they're cutting peace deals overseas.
Right.
And it's almost inevitable that a president will want to go big on the international stage because they're looking for legacy. But the president's legacy is not going to be secure unless he gets the economy going again. If people feel strong about their financial prospects for the future. And right now they're feeling anxiety, not only affordability, but anxiety about the future. And the president needs to do more to try to ease that anxiety.
I mean, Joel, are Democrats seeing an opening here?
Look, I think Democrats certainly feel a little bit more buoyed by the current political prospects, and particularly around this discussion around the economy. It's clear that the advantage that Donald Trump entered the year with on the economy has whittled away a lot, and there's a lot of reasons for that. For a long time, Dasha, I've always thought that the economy was kind of the permission slip for Donald Trump to do maybe some of the other things, the parts of his agenda that are a little bit more divided among the electorate, the things on immigration that can be a little bit more controversial, some of frankly, the weaponization things, the going after political enemies. Him having a stable, solid economy allows him to do that. When the American people don't feel good about those things, that's the destabilizer. That takes away his ability, his permission structure to do maybe all the things that are natural to him that he wants to do. In his first term, the reason why he had a period of relative peace is because the economy had a period of relative peace. And I think what you're seeing now is the economy dissembling for Donald Trump quicker in term 2 than it did in term 1.
Well, and John, on the immigration issue, actually, that also has an economic component that might not be looking so good for the president at this point.
I've talked to members of Congress, and they are hearing from their constituents who voted for Trump, but they're worried that they can't get workers for their different kinds of small businesses. You go to a local Home Depot, and it's empty because people who do a lot of the work in the fields or work in the homes and things like that, they're afraid to go there. So there's a lot of places where, and the president has talked about this, we need H-1B visas, we need H-2B visas, we need farm workers. And all those things are extremely important to keep the economy growing. I think, you're trying to do these things to achieve a very important political promise that he made, which was he was going to stem the tide of illegal immigration. But if you don't have the immigration work for you, it's self-defeating because you slow the economic growth, and it leads to more economic anxiety.
It's interesting, too. That's how so many voters kind of discuss whether or not they feel like the political world is normal, or things are going according to plan based on how their personal economy is going. It's almost like their check engine light, right? The check engine light of How much does it cost to buy eggs? How much money do I have in my pocket? Can I afford the basic needs that I have to keep my life going? If those things are going well, people generally think that the political system is working the way it's supposed to work. And when it's not, they think it's not. And what Donald Trump is on the wrong side of right now is people's experience to that question.
Well, it's not just Donald Trump. We saw with the shutdown, Congress was really on the wrong side of people's day-to-day experience between the airports, federal workers not getting their paychecks. We saw massive disruption because of this record-breaking shutdown. I keep hearing as I talk to people in Congress that there might be a possibility that we're here again with another potential shutdown in January. What do you think are the chances of that?
It's interesting. So, Chuck Schumer has been chastened by his base related to how people feel like the conclusion of the November shutdown, went. I think it's fair to say that the base of the Democratic Party was happy that elected Democrats were kind of going into this fight. I think there's a relationship between Democrats seeing an advantage on generic ballot going into 2026 and the fact that they showed that they were willing to fight. Dasha, if you look at a lot of the public opinion polls, I know it shows that the Democratic Party is held in low regard. A lot of those numbers are because there are rank and file Democrats. There are traditional Democratic constituencies who are unhappy with the party. So if they can start to get some parity with those numbers, that will elevate their chances for 2026 and to rebuild trust with the coalition. But to the question on the shutdown, that's what's at the core of Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries' decision about how to handle a potential January shutdown. Do they risk alienating that base that they're going to depend on to be engaged and resolved going into 2026? Or do they want to pass on this fight and say, there's a better fight ahead, there's another way to make our point politically than kind of going down this rabbit hole of having a government shutdown and maybe some uncertainty about how to resolve that? I
mean, that's another bit of pain coming very soon after the first bout. Do you think, given how things ended with the shutdown, I mean, there were a lot of people cheering Democrats on for many, many days, and then in the end, it kind of devolved into a bit of a civil war. Given how it concluded, is it a good idea for Dems to go down that road again?
I think if the elected Democrats feel like there is something else that they can point to take the energy, the bottled up energy that's within their base right now and steer it in another direction, yeah, they could probably sell those folks and sell their coalition on a different fight. But if they can't, they have a hard case to make about, well, why should we get behind this government that is sending masked troops in the different communities, this government that is taking away money through the rescissions process from priorities that we care about? I mean, if essentially people are experiencing the effects of a shutdown already, if you're someone who votes Democratic, if you are already experiencing what you think is part of a shutdown, why would you feel engaged in any way to give a thumbs up to Donald Trump's budget the way that he sees fit and the way that Mike Johnson and John Thune want to see that out? I
mean, John, in this last shutdown, there were very few conversations happening, especially at the leadership level across the aisle. Should Republican leaders, should Johnson, should Thune be trying to preempt this and having conversations with their Democratic counterparts right now? Or is it better politically for everyone to just be in their corners right now?
Well, I think there's two things. The most fascinating thing about the original shutdown is how long it took people to be concerned about it. It really didn't have an impact till the last few weeks, last week, I would say, and it really had to do with flying. People were worried about Thanksgiving. This time around, it's going to be after Christmas, so you're not gonna have that worries about some sort of Christmas shutdown. I think the Republicans are going to try to get the defense budget passed, along with the labor HHS budget, which will be combined. And so you're really only talking about 15 to 20% of the government that would be shut down. So it becomes kind of meaningless. And the biggest problem with shutdowns is it hurts the Congress as an institution, because they don't have control over what the executive branch is doing. So I thought it was a tremendous, from an institutional perspective, a tremendous mistake to have this shutdown for as long as it was. I think it was a tremendous mistake for House Republicans to be out of session for as long as they were, because they really were not driving any kind of messages. For example, they could have driven a message had they been in session about health care. What were the real stakes in the Obamacare fight, and why don't we want to increase these premiums, and why is Obamacare broken? They didn't do any of that. They didn't talk about health care at all. So hopefully they will learn lessons about if there is going to be another shutdown. And the Republicans do not want one. So it's the Democrats will make the decision that they want to do it for internal Democratic reasons. And how are you going to react to that? You just cannot be passive. I believe very strongly in the concept. If you're not on offense, you're on the run. And Republicans did not win this shutdown. I don't think the Democrats won it either, but they won it more than the Republicans did.
That's interesting. Do you agree with that?
I have a slightly different take on it. I would just say this. You brought up Obamacare. You brought up the ACA. I actually think that's going to be the core issue related to what happens in January. Are they able to make a longer deal? I know there's a discussion of, hey, is there a 3-year extension? Is there a 1-year extension? And I think for Schumer, for Jeffries, particularly Schumer, to save some face with that Democratic base, it has to be contingent on making a deal that changes people's lives dramatically related to the rising cost of healthcare that they're experiencing, because those ACA expenses are going to expire at the end of the year.
What should Republicans do on this healthcare issue, though? Because this is a topic that has had the GOP on its back foot for quite some time. I mean, Democrats made a ton of gains by putting healthcare in the spotlight during the shutdown. The president's talking about some plans, giving people money to figure it out on their own. I think Johnson's talking to his people. Thune's talking to his people. Is this something that Republicans want to be working on, especially going into a midterm year?
Healthcare, when there's these premiums and they're going up, what'll end up happening is that a lot of people will decide they can't afford the premiums and they'll just go to the emergency room for their healthcare. So that increases costs. It would be far better had the Republicans come up with some sort of coherent alternative to Obamacare, which they should have done during President Trump's first term, and they still haven't done. Republicans typically don't like to talk about healthcare reform because they don't really
is there even time at this point? Like, can they come up with something? Is there anything happening behind the scenes?
There's some discussion of it, right? There's discussion of this idea where you would have money go directly to consumers. That I've seen some experts that would debunk that, and that would say that would still negatively impact the system, so that wouldn't necessarily get at the core issue. But it seems like there is some Republican momentum potentially behind that.
I think there is some momentum. But the question is, would it be enough to get bipartisan support, which I find very difficult. I think the visions between the Republicans and the Democrats on healthcare are totally different. The Republicans do not like Obamacare. They still do not like Obamacare. Some want to increase kick this can down the road and extend the subsidies just so they don't have it as a political issue. But most Republicans don't want to do that. To your point, I don't know if there's enough time to come up with a comprehensive plan. If they do that, they'd have to do it through reconciliation because it would be a Republican-only plan. I find it very difficult that the Democrats would all of a sudden give President Trump a huge win on health care in a bipartisan way. Because it would be, if they got a bipartisan deal on health care, it would be a big victory for the president. And what you see with the president do instead, he's going to healthcare CEOs, he's going to pharma CEOs, and he's trying to cut his own deals. Like, he's trying to do something on GLPs, he's trying to do something on all these other expensive drugs. He's trying to do MFN for a lot of these drug manufacturers. He hasn't really had much of a conversation with the healthcare insurers, and that's the conversation that has to happen because
he's sort of
insurance
tackling it
premiums
piece by piece
are
right
so
now.
expensive for so many people, and these Obamacare subsidies are not enough. And if you look at the subsidies themselves, they make up about 20% of the increase. The number one increase is inflation. It's healthcare inflation, and you know what happens when you put a lot of people in emergency rooms? It becomes even more expensive.
Let's talk about how this might impact the midterms. I mean, do you think healthcare is going to be one of the big topics? What does your crystal ball say about what are going to be the narratives going into 2026?
I think healthcare is certainly the issue that the Democrats would like to go on offense around. I also do think that corruption and accountability for Trump and what I think a lot of voters and clearly what Democrats view as abuse of power from this administration.
Do you think that's going to resonate, though? Because Biden tried to make this sort of, death of democracy argument, and that was too, I think, esoteric.
It's all about the contexting, right? So, like, there's a conversation around corruption grounded in the economy that says this guy promised to make your life more affordable. He promised to be laser focused on the economy, and he didn't. He's cutting side deals for himself, for his family, for his friends. That is a version of a abuse of power, corruption message that does work. You can't segment that message and you can't say, I'm only going to talk about the democracy stuff here, I'm only going to talk about the economy stuff here. You have to have one combined conversation.
Have Democrats done that effectively?
Not every Democrat has figured out how to do that effectively. I do think you've seen some versions of that be successful. I think that's part of Zohran Mamdani's success in New York City. I think you heard nodes of that in Spanberger and Cheryl's success. By the way, those folks, not all the same politically. So there is a Democratic message out there that can bring all of those elements together. They just got to be disciplined to find it. And there's a long way between now and next November.
John,
obviously.
what does your crystal ball say?
Well, what typically happens in midterms, especially the second term, is we need a check on the president's power. And I think that's what the Democrats are ultimately going to come to. They think the president has overreached on so many of these things that you talked about, and so I think that unifies the Democratic coalition. But I also think it gets the independents on board. The Republicans, on the other hand, are going to have to make the case of peace and prosperity and obstruction from the Democrats who are stopping good things from happening. But that requires the Republicans to come up with good things that they're voting on that the Democrats are obstructing, which so far there's not a second term agenda that the president's really outlined outside of OBBB on the domestic front. And they've had to really hope that the economy comes roaring back or they're going to be in big trouble.
I also want to talk about 2028. I know it feels like it's a long way away, but boy, we're already seeing some folks start to come out of the woodwork. I want you to take a look at this Politico headline. It says, "Admit it, Gavin Newsom is the 2028 frontrunner." Joel?
Oh, I think he, in terms of name ideas, if a Democrat was put on the spot to name, hey, who is the highest profile Democrat that have a chance at the White House in 2028? I'm sure he rises to the top. He's the governor of the largest state. He's had some of the highest profile fights with Donald Trump. I actually, so Dasha, I worked the 2008 presidential cycle. I worked for John Edwards. That cycle had heavy hitters all up and down. Joe Biden, a future president. You had Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, Bill Richardson. That times 3 is probably what you're looking at in 2028 for Democrats. You might have an AOC. You might have a Gavin Newsom, a Pete Buttigieg. You may have someone who is not a political office holder, someone who's an entertainer, who has an independent power base, who decides to run.
Any
as a
particular
Democrat.
names you're thinking of there?
I think there could be some comedians. There could be some business people who could get in the race. But I guess my broader point is the bench is very deep on the Democratic side. And honestly, look, yes, Gavin Newsom's in a good spot right now. But if we look at the history of our presidential cycles, the last few cycles, you actually don't want to be in pole position
So
2.5
early,
years
right?
before
Yeah,
the
yeah.
election at this point. Yeah.
The conversation around post-Trump GOP is a complicated one. Obviously, the president does not want that conversation to be happening at all, but his vice president is right now the heir apparent. You also have Marco Rubio that a lot of folks are talking about. I mean, do you think ultimately it is going to be President Trump sort of anointing the next leader, or is something else going to happen altogether?
Well, it depends how well the next 2 years goes. I think he would like to. I think he would like to have. I think he would like to have J.D. Vance be the guy, but I think Rubio really does have a better chance of winning against Gavin Newsom. I look at this through the prism of Gavin Newsom. He scares me, and I don't because he's very good at all kinds of different media. He's good looking, and he's the governor of the biggest state in the country, and he's able to raise a lot of money. And I think he's very glib, and so that makes me very nervous. And he's already well known, and he's kind of portrayed himself as the alternative to President Trump. He also is somebody who's not scared to talk to Republicans. I mean, he had Charlie Kirk on his podcast, so he scares me a little bit. And I think that we should look at the prism of who's going to be able to beat Gavin Newsom, who would be the strongest candidate, and from there, Ted Cruz just announced that. Didn't announce. I'm sorry.
Well, he's going to run.
He's going to run. I think that Tom Cotton might run. I think Brian Kemp from Georgia might run. I think Ron DeSantis might run again. We have a pretty deep bench as well. But the big issue is it's so difficult for a vice president to run for president to replace that. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. You saw what happened with Kamala Harris. She couldn't figure out how to break away from Joe Biden. Biden had a hard time getting the nomination when Obama left. So it's not that easy. And so J.D. Vance has his work cut out for him.
In particular, this vice president trying to run with this president that he's serving with, it is a particular challenge for J.D. Vance. I'd also say, too, the fact that you have in recent weeks so many Republicans kind of popping their head up, Ron DeSantis doing more television, folks like Ted Cruz talking more openly about running, that signals to me a little bit of a change in the Republican, acceptance of where Donald Trump is in his life cycle. Is he closer to being a lame duck, which I know is a shunned upon word in the White House right now? But let's face reality, Donald Trump's not going to be on the ballot again. Republicans are going to have to start looking forward to what's next. There's a reason why you have folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are more bold and challenging Donald Trump right now. I actually think this conversation we're having is proof positive that Republicans are already starting to look past Donald Trump.
And to your point, when the president says, I am MAGA and MAGA is me, well, how does someone run on that? Because no one else is Donald Trump other than Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So how do you define what MAGA is if the president, who's not a traditional conservative, is kind of identified the MAGA movement as something that he has done, and only he can define it.
Does MAGA survive beyond Trump?
This is the big question, and it depends on how strong he finishes out. If the Democrats win the House and get close to taking back the Senate, his final 2 years are going to be miserable.
You know what this actually reminds me of? Barack Obama, obviously these are very different political figures in terms of their political ideology, but Barack Obama, very similar to Donald Trump. His brand was Obama. It wasn't the Democratic Party.
Right.
Donald Trump's brand is Trump MAGA. It's not the Republican Party. And I actually think what Republicans are, again, starting to come to grips with is something that I think Democrats you've seen borne out over the last few cycles, is that because Barack Obama took his brand, walked away with it, and voters did not necessarily have the same loyalty to the Democratic Party brand as they did to Obama, I actually think that Republicans might have the same experience.
I mean, we already saw
Trump.
that in the off-year election,
Yeah.
right? The biggest problem for Republicans was that Trump voters didn't show up for Trump not being on the ballot.
They also had pretty lousy candidates. I mean, Winsome Sears was not a good candidate. Citarelli had lost a couple times before, and we didn't. We were supporting Andrew Cuomo in New York. I mean, why were we supporting Andrew Cuomo? It made no sense. No, you're right, and I think that all over the place we had elections that were really bad for us, and that's been the case for a while. Trump has to really kind of make this election about not just about him, but also about the Trump voter and the working class, which he's not doing a great job right now.
I do think he can do that, because I know from my reporting and many others that he does plan to be out on the campaign trail quite a bit in the midterms. How much is that going to be helpful? How much risk is there also for Republicans?
Well, there's some risk, but it seems to me that the Republicans can't win with Trump and they can't win without him, and so that puts them in a very difficult spot. And I think that the president has to really think about this. How do I come up with an agenda for the last couple of years of my term? Because your point about lame duck, every day he gets more and more lame, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just the way the process works. Unless he decides he's going to run a third term, which would be a disaster for the country and a disaster for him.
Very quickly, you brought up Jack Ciattarelli. That is what you're discussing is exactly what he went through in New Jersey. He had to run far enough away from Donald Trump so that he could appeal to independents and maybe some Democrats who are maybe not loyal to the Democratic brand, but he couldn't run so far away from MAGA that he shunned the MAGA base. And I think a lot of Republicans are going to find themselves in that position coming up soon.
Before I let you both go, I want to show you a little segment that we have here on the show called Not on My Bingo Card. Every week we highlight something a little offbeat, a little weird, a little funky, unexpected, as our politics are today. This week, what was not on my bingo card is a team up between rap star Nicki Minaj and Mike Waltz, the U.S. ambassador to the UN. Minaj became the first female rapper to address the United Nations, with the ambassador and faith leaders calling for protections for Christians in Nigeria. Watch.
I must say I am very nervous, so please, well, thank you, Ambassador Waltz, for this invitation. It is an honor to stand on this stage with you and the other distinguished speakers here today to shine a spotlight on the deadly threat faced by thousands of Christians in Nigeria. I would like to thank President Trump for prioritizing this issue.
Ambassador Mike Waltz here with the amazing Queen of Rap, Nicki Minaj, and I just can't be more thankful to you for putting your spotlight on the persecution, the killing, the devastation that's going on with Christians in Nigeria.
I don't know. I was looking for Waltz to drop a verse there, but who would have expected this team up?
It's interesting. I imagine that might be the first time Mike Waltz has ever uttered the name Nicki Minaj, let alone into a camera. Nicki Minaj actually, I think, responded to a Truth Social post that Donald Trump put out a few days before that, where he talked about this issue in Nigeria. Look, there's a lot of context to that maybe that discussion misses, but be that as it may, having someone like Nicki Minaj with that type of cultural cachet speak on your behalf is certainly something that I think is something that the Trump folks will hope will pay dividends for them. And what I would add is, and I think that Democrats have to kind of come to grips with this, Trump has been skillful at finding those types of cultural currency moments, whether it's going to a UFC fight or going and doing a couple of minutes of announcing on a football game.
Cristiano Ronaldo at the White House this week.
And that's a challenge for Democrats to think about, and how not to poo-poo that, but how to maybe mimic that and take some lessons from how Trump finds connection to some of those cultural moments.
I mean, there was a time when Republicans really struggled to get any sort of celebrity cachet.
You'd be surprised. Conservatives really like Nicki Minaj. They liked her during COVID. She did some things that were the conservatives very much liked. This is a good issue for conservatives. To your point about Trump, he's a master at bringing in diverse coalitions and using them for his own purposes and actually being smart about it. The question is, can that coalition continue, and can any other Republican politician do it? But Nicki Minaj she's kind of a secret conservative, even though she's got some...
It's not too secret, John.
Not too secret. A lot to watch for coming down the pike here. Thank you both so much. John Feehery, Republican strategist, Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Thank you both. We'll close this week's program with our ceasefire moment of the week, highlighting what's possible when politicians come together as Americans, not just partisans. A Minnesota nonprofit is leading the charge in building relationships across the aisle. A unique exchange program pairs two state legislators from opposing political parties and helps them plan visits to each other's districts. The goal is to form connections, learn about local challenges, and identify policy issues.
We went to see the airplanes being manufactured at Cirrus. We went in the woods to watch the loggers log. And then we went to Sappy to see the whole production line, to see what's happening. We saw the Brimson fires. He went on an ATV ride to see the trail investments in northern Minnesota. It was the first time he'd been on an ATV. It was just really wonderful to see and showcase northeastern Minnesota.
Republican Natalie Zalesnikar and Democrat Ned Carroll, just the latest pairing to engage in the exchange program. Before them, Democrat Anang Mahmood and Republican Cal Warwas went on a bike ride and lunch. Lawmakers coming together, the type of moments we love to showcase here. That's all the time we have for this episode. Ceasefire is also available as a podcast. Find us in all the usual places. I'm Dasha Burns, and remember, whether or not you agree, keep talking and keep listening.